We have over 100 teachers who make six figures. And so I'm proud of that, that our teachers who used to be forced to enter into administration quicker than they probably planned because they have a passion for teaching, now we can invest that money in our teachers.
The biggest driver of teacher shortages is teachers leaving the profession before retirement. That's true nationally. It's true in Texas as well.
This is so much change and so many new things. Like the mantra I'm trying to adopt is let it cook.
Hi, and welcome to Upstream. I'm Dr. Sarah Jones, Evaluation Officer at the Houston Endowment, and we're excited to be here today to talk about teacher certification, a really important issue right now. We're really excited to be able to share research from Learning Policy Institute on that very timely topic. If you're in education, you know that House Bill 2 has changed a lot in education. It has really effectively started to phase out uncertified teachers in core subjects, but also provided incentives for teacher preparation programs like Grow Your Own and residencies. And I'm so excited to be joined here by my colleague, Program Officer Carlos Villagrana, and as well as a brilliant researcher and two accomplished leaders in the education space to talk about this topic. With us today, we have Ryan Franklin from Philanthropy Advocates, who has been working tirelessly in the policy space around this issue. We also have Dr. Latanya Goffney, who is superintendent of Aldine, which serves most of North Houston and the surrounding areas. She is a nationally recognized leader who served on the governor's teacher task force and also my former boss. And we have Dr. Susan Kemper-Patrick from the Learning Policy Institute, who has spent over a decade looking at teacher workforce issues across the nation. And so we're really excited to have this dream team with us today. I also took a look at the registration, and I know that we have people from across the education spectrum. We have several districts and EPPs, educator prep programs, in attendance. We have people from local and state government. We have a lot of nonprofits and other education agencies who are joining us today. And so I'm super excited to have everybody join this conversation. Before we get started, we always like to tell a little bit personal story. And one thing that's really unique about this table is that everybody sitting around this table today has been a classroom teacher, which I think is great for this discussion. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about each of your journeys to becoming a teacher. And Ryan, we're going to start with you this time.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I was a rural kid, first in my family to go to college, and I tell people the only folks I know who had gone to college were teachers and preachers, and I didn't think I could pull off being a preacher, so I went to be a teacher. And so I went through a traditional preparation program at West Texas A&M out in the Panhandle, came back to Central Texas and was a teacher in a couple of very small, very rural districts where I got to teach a little bit of everything, things I was certified for and things I was not certified for.
Excellent. And Dr. Goffney, how about you?
Sarah, I'm so glad to be here with you today and the rest of the team, and just really proud of you and proud to have worked with you. Also, it was an awesome opportunity to reflect back to 1999, my first year as an 8th grade language arts teacher in Cold Spring, Texas, like you, population of 697. I was so excited to get that job, being a first-generation college student and thinking about how education changed my life and reflecting on the teachers who had been impactful for me was one of the reasons that I entered into the teaching profession. And I was blessed. I went to Sam Houston State University, the best preparation program for preparing teachers. And so I felt like I was really prepared. I went through the certification program. I remember being nervous because I interviewed before I had passed my English test. So when you interview before you pass a test, what do they always tell you? Once you're certified, you have a job. And so I remember going and taking the test, being really nervous because I recognized that our livelihood rested on whether or not I was certified or not. And so really grateful for the preparation because of course, the rest is history. I became a certified teacher. I was hired and just thankful for how education changed my life. And now we get to change lives through education, but we can't do any of it without great teachers.
Susan, how about you?
So I entered teaching through Teach for America. So I had a pretty abbreviated training, very different from the traditional training that you all had. But I think what really helped me is my district that I taught in, which was about 10 miles from where I grew up. So it was an area I was very familiar with in North Carolina. we had a great mentorship program. And so I also taught 8th grade ELA. And I had a mentor teacher who also had taught 8th grade ELA. And a classic story, my last class of the day was really tough. And so she would always come and observe me during that last class. And then after school, we'd sit together and I would cry and she would tell me it was going to be okay. But I really credit her for really giving me concrete strategies to, really help my teaching, but also just that reassurance that this is a hard job and you're going to be okay. And that really helped me through my first year.
Carlos, what about you?
Yeah, so I actually graduated college from Oklahoma State University with a bachelor's degree in elementary education. And I was fortunate to be able to get hired down here in Houston, starting off in A-Leaf ISD. And my good fortune continued because I was hired to teach at Kennedy Elementary, which at that time was Annenberg Beacon School. And so we had so many accomplished teachers there and staff. So I really felt like I had to come in and really kind of prove myself. I was teaching first and second grade mixed age group, so 10 first graders, 10 second graders, different levels. They were really doing some innovative things at that time, and I was I'd gotten great preparation, but really what got me through that first year was just amazing staff who were willing to invest in me. Also, just an amazing community with parents who were really supportive, who wanted their best for their kids, and so I really felt like I lucked out, coming to Houston and being placed there. So it's been a long journey, but I'm still glad still in it.
Yeah, teaching actually also brought me to Houston. I'm also a Teach for America Corps member, but I started here in Houston at Houston HISD. Had my summer institute at University of Houston and taught at Edison Middle School. And then thankfully was hired at an elementary school, which was a much better fit for me at Park Place, and kind of really similar stories. I started feeling not super prepared, that 1 month crash course in the summer from Teach for America, but had really great team at Park Place Elementary School of admin and of teachers who just really supported me through that first year of teaching and into that second year. So I think it's really exciting that we all come to this from the perspective of former teachers and with different pathways. There is actually some really great new data that has just dropped around teacher certification from the Texas Education Agency. And I'd like to kind of start with that. Ryan, I know you've been following this data really closely. I'm wondering, can you unpack some of that new data for us?
Yeah, so excited to dive in a little bit. So we know that 1 year does not necessarily make a trend, but I think there are some slight reasons for optimism in the new data. I think one of the things TEA has started looking at is where all the new teachers come from in a given year. And one of the things that really jumped out this year is we have more experienced teachers returning to the classroom after having been out of the classroom, largest population of those teachers on record. And I think that's a good sign that our experienced teachers are willing to come back to the classroom and to come back to teaching because they know what they're getting into. And so that's a good sign that they're coming back. We also, it feels like we've seen the trends start to level off or start to decrease around the increase in hiring uncertified teachers. And so still that's the largest population of brand new teachers is that uncertified teacher population. But for the first time in a few years, starting to see that number start to decrease, and that feels encouraging. On the whole, we saw more teachers earn certification last year, having completed a preparation program. Still a long way to go between the supply and the demand we have, but that's a positive. And also teacher attrition has declined again so that's another sign. So we've got to do what we can to keep the teachers we've got and to grow them while also building the supply of well-prepared teachers.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of factors are kind of going into that data. What are some of the forces you see at play in some of these?
Well, I think one of the things is districts have sort of been put on the clock with House Bill 2 around phasing out uncertified teachers. And so I think decisions are starting to be made there. I think there's always also larger market forces that impact the teacher workforce. And so where the job market is good other places, that can draw from our teachers. And so, but when the hiring market slows down or there's some uncertainty there, we tend to be able to hang on to our teachers a little better. So those things all kind of play into the teacher workforce.
Yeah. So these are some promising data, at least. I know we can't have trends after 1 year, but any other thoughts on kind of this data or things that you're seeing from anyone else?
I know in Aldine, we're seeing an uptick in making sure that we have the resources and supports in order to grow our own teachers. Because when I think back to COVID and post-COVID, what was important to us, and I'm guilty of saying it, and you might have heard it, we just wanted a caring adult in every classroom because we saw an uptick in those who were leaving the profession. And so when I think about the different supports and the ways in which we are making sure that we are growing our own students, starting with high school students. Literally in 2019, when I entered, in 2018, when I entered Aldine, we started at Rose Avalos P-Tech, and one of the pathways is a teacher training. We're going to train our own, grow our own teachers. One of the things that has existed for many years is each pathway at the high school has teacher training, and so we have an educator signing day. And we just recently had our educator signing day, and we were so grateful. When you look back, 2018, we had 40, and this year we had a historic 114.
Amazing.
And so that's amazing, but it also is showing that we're turning the tide in addressing the needs of our district, because we've decreased the number of uncertified teachers that we're hiring. We're making sure to and providing that preparation. As we all alluded to, we went through the certification program, whether you went through TFA or a traditional program, you had a process, you had mentors, and we have to recreate those things at the local level.
Yeah.
Fortunately or unfortunately, and we have to have the funding in order to make that happen, and that's what I'm grateful that House Bill 2 has done.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I would add is just that I think we're so fortunate in Texas to have access to the data that we have. I know that doesn't exist everywhere, to be able to kind of monitor how this is kind of playing out and be able to respond to it. And I think we've seen similar things in the Houston region, all the kind of, 1-year trends, if you will, that we kind of highlighted here. We're seeing our district partners or EPP partners start to mentioning that, it does feel like we're kind of maybe turning the corner around this. So I think, it's promising and optimistic about what's to come.
So we chose Learning Partner Institute this year to partner and really think about the workforce in Texas, because they have national expertise with teacher workforce. And so Susan has done some research here in Texas around this issue. And I'd like you to talk to us just a little bit about why Texas is so ripe for this research.
Yeah. So, I mean, as you all know, Texas has the largest teacher workforce in the country. And I feel like a lot of the things happening in Texas are happening in other places, but maybe to a smaller extent, right? So, I mean, when you think about teacher certification, the ways people become teachers in Texas are similar to what you see in other states. You have folks going through pre-service prep, getting a standard certificate, going into the classroom, like we've already heard about. You have folks on intern certificates who are teaching and learning at the same time. And then you have emergency permits. But I think what does set Texas apart and why we're here today to talk about it is, that really large proportion of people who are coming in without any certification at all. There are a few other states that are playing with those sorts of policies that we're going to hear about from the Districts of Innovation Policy. But I think Texas is kind of unique in kind of the policy landscape around certification. And I think especially thinking about how dramatic that change has happened, how quickly it's happened in Texas. A decade ago, maybe 2,500 folks were entering every year without any certification. In the last 4 years, it's been over 12,000. It is going down, which is great, but it's still a lot of people. And so I think that's why it's a really good space to be doing a lot of research to really understand what's happening. There's a really wonderful and large group of Texas researchers who have good data, who are really able to speak to a lot of important questions that not all states can speak to. So I think that's really important. One other thing that I think is kind of where Texas has led the way, for better or worse, is on online teacher preparation. I think this is something that's happening nationally. Preparation is moving online across the country, but I think Texas, it happened earlier and it's happened faster. And, there's a lot of good things about online preparation, right? It's much more accessible. Folks who live in rural areas or career switchers or parents, it's really creates a lot of flexibility and opportunities. But there's also this growing research base that gives us some pause, right? That online prep may not be as effective, especially if it's kind of asynchronous, module-based. You're not necessarily getting clinical experience or mentorship. And so I think that's another place where we can really learn from what's happening in Texas. And that's going to really inform kind of the national conversation about what good online preparation could look like.
Thanks. Yeah, Ryan, she mentioned that Texas has had this big kind of swing. Can you tell us a little bit about the policies that kind of got us here, or helped us get here?
Yeah. So in 2015, the legislature passed the legislation that allowed districts to have what we call the districts of innovation. And really, that is extending the flexibility that our public charter schools have to our districts in many areas. And one of those was hiring uncertified teachers. I think Susan makes a really good point that even before that, the majority of new teachers in Texas were coming in through fast track online alternative certification programs. So it wasn't, I think people tend to think that the norm is a traditionally prepared person that does their semester of student teaching and knows all their life that they want to be a teacher. That hasn't been the norm in Texas for a very long time. So even before districts had the flexibility to hire uncertified teachers, the majority of new teachers were coming through those routes. So that policy passed in 2015. We saw a slight uptick in districts hiring, but really it was coming out of the pandemic and then the much higher record teacher attrition levels and the struggle to attract people to the profession that caused the massive shift that we've seen over the last few years, where we've seen over half of all new teachers hired have been uncertified. So I think those are kind of the factors. At the same time, we saw it was kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy because those teachers weren't prepared and they weren't staying in the classroom. And so it was fueling continued higher attrition, and we saw struggling student outcomes as a result and tied to that too. So it all kind of tied together and was the perfect storm leading into the moment we're in now.
And what does that mean, Carlos, for districts, funders, education prep providers?
Yeah, in many ways, thinking back to that 2023, it felt like we had just kind of came out of a storm, a crisis, right? And we were trying to figure out where do we go from here. I mean, unfortunately, the Houston region has experienced this too often, with a storm or some sort of situation. And I think in our best moments, what we've done is we've come together as a community and figure out, hold on, how do we support one another? How do we move forward so that we're actually coming out stronger from this experience? And in many ways, I want to say that we've actually were able to do some of that. Back in 2023, we had been funding lots of different some districts, some EPP programs, but we hadn't really brought everybody together into the same room to have kind of broader conversations, deeper conversation about, well, hold on, if we could reimagine a future, what would that look like? And so it looked like a less siloed, a more integrated type of system. And so that's what we did. We started the community of practice. We partnered with the PAL Foundation actually to start that. Initially, there was some reluctancy from, hold on, you want me to come together with other districts and kind of pull back the curtain and tell what's happening? You want us to have EPP programs, both ACP and university in the same table? That might be cause for some fireworks. But I think what we realized when we looked at the data, there was not going to be a way for one entity to solve it or a couple to solve it. We were going to have to really think about how do we work together to actually come out of this stronger. And so just to kind of keep a couple of highlights that came out of the community of practice, when we looked at the data, the districts very quickly said, hey, we need to get this uncertified teachers, reined in, to be able to have a more stable teacher workforce. And so one of the working groups, how do we reduce the number of uncertified teachers? The second working group that formed from there was, we have a lot of people who are interested in becoming teachers. If you take a look at the number of people that sign up for an associate's degree in teaching, we have a lot of people who start and get enrolled in preparation programs. But we only have about 32% of the people that sign up to become teachers actually make their way all the way to the classroom, get certified. So we knew that there was something that we could do there. The last thing I'll kind of point out is that that resulted in starting teacher apprenticeship programs. It also meant that we could start doing some university-based programs at a community college where you could actually get a bachelor's degree at a community college, lower cost, all in the same system. We also are seeing the launch of competency-based programs as well. And so it's been great to see just the innovation, how districts have been able to partner with EPP programs so that there's a much more integrated approach to the work. And for real, the really last thing I'll say on this is that we were able to partner with researchers to really figure out what's working. Is there anything that's moving the needle, bringing our grantees together, our partners. And we were able to take some of that learning and partner with our policy grantees to then take some of this understanding and knowing back to the state to help inform better policy. So I'm excited, about where we're at now, but it's took everyone pulling together from a community standpoint to get us to this place, and now for us to have the opportunity that we have now.
Yeah. No, and I'm so excited to have you with us today for the district perspective. Aldine has been such a standout in this work, and I'm so thrilled that you're here to kind of talk about it, because I remember I was there and coming out of COVID,
Yep.
and I remember there were teachers quitting. They weren't showing up. We were building dashboards to see which classroom had a teacher what day.
No.
I was the data team and we were subbing, right?
Yes.
Sometimes
No,
and so it was
yes.
really like, how do we make sure that there are teachers in the classroom, that there are adults who care for these kids in the classroom? And Aldine has come so far from that. And so I'd love to hear some of the things that you guys have done, just building the pipeline and just supporting teachers there on the ground.
Oh, Sarah, you're making me anxious as I think about those. I've elected to serve in hard-to-staff areas. Back in the day, it was in Cold Spring, the rural area. And I do remember when certified teachers were able to go online and get certified. That was a huge, do you hire them? That was a conversation. And so when I think about where we were at that time and where we've been, it's really important to kind of set the context. When you think about districts that serve urban areas, and that's what Aldine does, 73% Hispanic, 23% African-American, 90% economically disadvantaged, 100% Title I. When teachers have choices, that may or may not be their first choice. So when you think about the challenges, coming out of COVID, we had lofty goals, had launched the 2019 strategic plan, had launched high-quality instruction materials, and done all those things that were going to help us to move the needle and grow every kid. But if we don't have good teachers,
Right.
that's not going to happen. So we had to be strategic, had to think about how we're going to move beyond just having a caring adult that sometimes look like you're going to some in the classroom. And so I'm grateful for the partnerships, and we had to look around. I talked earlier about how we were growing teachers from those who are in our classrooms, getting them to think about it. That's a long-term investment, right?
Right.
And then we looked around even at our paraprofessionals and looking at the work. And many of our paraprofessionals had, as you alluded to, 2 years of college. And so how can we encourage them who already have experience working with our kids to become certified? And so we have partnerships with Texas Women's University for our paraprofessionals, as well as UHD to help get our paraprofessionals certified. And then we had to make sure that we did have some teachers who, just need a little push. They were doing a decent job for a first-year teacher or a new teacher in the classroom, but they weren't really working towards becoming certified. And we wanted them to become those certified teachers. So working to provide the supports, because you can have expectations, but without the supports and without the coaching and the mentorships that we were all benefited from, it was really important. Additionally, some of the other things that came out of House Bill 2, including TIA, that was a game changer. And when we think about the governor's goal and the commissioner's goal of having teachers make six figures, that was real for us because that was going to help us to attract more students, considering, I said 90% economically disadvantaged, so TIA was going to be worth more in Aldine ISD. And so when we look at, as we're trying to accomplish all these other goals, how we're growing and supporting teachers and how we're aligning our different systems, it's been a blessing. When we look at, we have 695 TIA designated teachers today, and we have 395 that are going to be announced. So over 1,000 right now. And then with the announcement, the acknowledge level is going to cause even more. And although that's not where we want our teachers to stay, it's a pathway into becoming the recognized and master's level. And so I think the more time, attention that we can put on growing our teachers, the better our student outcomes are going to be, and the more we're going to be able to accomplish the goals in some of our districts that have lots of challenges as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I actually was out to dinner the other day with friends, and someone asked, we were talking about past jobs, and someone said, I'd mentioned that I had worked at Aldine, and someone asked about that. And another person at the table said, oh, I heard if you're a teacher at Aldine, it's great. They're going to support you a lot, but you better be ready to work because they're going to support you and you're going to do good work for the kids. So I was like, I think that's right on.
That's right on. But what's good about some of the supports that have come out of House Bill 2, they're getting paid as well. We have over 100 teachers who make six figures. And so I'm proud of that. that our teachers who used to be forced to enter into administration quicker than they probably planned because they have a passion for teaching, now we can invest that money in our teachers.
That's amazing. You also served on the vacancy task force. Can you tell me a little bit about that and what were some of the recommendations that came out of that?
Listen, I just remember we were at a meeting and the commissioner was there and we were talking about how we needed to focus on these vacancies. This was post-COVID.
Right.
It was top of mind for most leaders, but it was really top of mind for me for the reasons that you alluded to with the dashboard and making sure we had more than just a caring adult in the classroom, but a competent, caring, high-capacity teacher in every classroom. And wondering who's going to be talking about this. And I was so grateful and thankful that when the governor put out the call about the teacher vacancy task force, that I was on the list and got to serve and convene with educators from all over the state, including teachers and superintendents and others who were facing this crisis. Because at that point, nobody was really talking about it.
Right.
And so it was a conversation that started. And while pay and compensation was top of the list and there were benefits and different things that were discussed, one of the things that, as a superintendent who participated, I got to listen to the teachers, it was also about the conditions in which teachers were serving. And so what was kind of a aha, while compensation was important, but also, again, addressing time. Teachers wanted more time to be able to take on some of the additional tasks they were responsible for. They also talked about, benefits and different things of that nature. And so it was a real opportunity to hear like grassroots level. And then it was encouraging to see how it showed up in House Bill 2. And one of the things that I found enlightening too, because sometimes we forget that teachers are learners.
Yeah.
Teachers, she shared it, and I hate that I left out all my mentor teachers that I had my first year. That's powerful. And so to have teachers who say, hey, I struggled my first year. I would have benefited from a mentor. I would have benefited from additional training, additional support. I did not go through a traditional program, so I didn't have X, Y, and Z. And so instead of having to independently as a campus or a district to address what those supports look like, to have it universally show up in House Bill 2 has been a blessing.
Yeah. And Ryan, you were in Austin working around the same time as the task force issues on teacher workforce issues. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing there in your time there?
Yeah, well, one of the most compelling things about the work that Dr. Goffney and the other task force members did was to think of holistically about the teacher workforce and not to just think about just compensation, just working conditions, just preparation, but really to think about it all. And so I think that gave those of us in the advocacy space a strong jumping off point to help tell the story and say it's not enough to just pull one lever. We've got to pull all the levers and we've got to go all in to change the way to become a teacher and then how we support our teachers once we get there. So I think that was a strong jumping off point. I think people had a real hard time even imagining that this population of uncertified teachers was happening. It didn't matter how many times we would meet with legislators or with legislative staff. It just was so far from their experience. And so we had to really stay on top of telling that story and elevating the local experience. And one of the things that we had foundations from all around the state who had seen the need in their local communities and who had invested in promising practices. And so we were able to sort of marshal those stories, bring those together to help tell the story that, hey, if the legislature will come along and support the changes that local districts are making and local communities are doing, supported by philanthropy, we can drive change at scale. And really it was the combination of sort of every lever, everything we could do. And we got, in 2023, we got to the 1 yard line of getting policy passed, but we didn't get across the finish line. And so we had to come back and retell those stories and seed that to get the impact and to get over the finish line in 2025.
Yeah. I think we have a clip of just that.
This is an historic piece of legislation as House Bill 2 invests nearly $8 billion in funding for our public schools. That is a larger investment for Texas public schools and our education system than any other legislation we filed in the history of the state of Texas.
I think we were really fortunate to have strong leadership from the governor, from our chair on the Senate side, from, as we heard, our chair on the House Public Education side with Chairman Buckley, really helping champion these issues and ensure that we were able to get across the finish line on that second attempt.
And so now we've had some promising practices. And Susan, I know you've done some research. Can you tell us a little bit about the research that you've been doing on
Yeah.
this issue?
Absolutely. So, we started by looking at the data and, we looked at the 24-25 data. And, as we've heard, like the statewide numbers tell one story.
Yep.
And you can look statewide and you'll see that in the 24-25 school year, about 12% of teachers had no certification at all. But that really obscures what's happening at the district level, right? And it's very different across the different districts in the state. And so we started by kind of looking at, this district level data to say, like, well, where are the districts that have maintained really high certification rates, or that are places where they may be hiring uncertified teachers, but they're really investing to make sure that those teachers, get through the certification process. So that's what we wanted to do in this study. And so we did it in two ways. One was looking more just at the data to understand, if we look at the district level, what kind of factors are going to be associated with higher certification rates. So we looked geographically, we looked at things like district size or beginning teacher salary, just to understand those relationships. But then I think what was kind of the more important and more informative part was like getting into the districts, right? And so we wanted to identify districts that had, really figured out some good practices that were going to keep certification rates high or, have uncertified teachers, but really get them through certification. So we ended up interviewing district leaders in 6 districts that were identified both by the data and by kind of leaders throughout the state. So we interviewed the district leaders in those districts who were, in charge of HR, in charge of hiring, recruitment, and support to really understand their practices.
Awesome. What were some of the key takeaways from those?
Yeah, so we ended up with a couple different ones. And so one I think we'll start with is around the importance of retention. And so I know we have a graph to show on that, and so I'll let that come up. But, as we've already heard, like keeping teachers in the profession is the most important thing you can do to address teacher shortages. The biggest driver of teacher shortages is teachers leaving the profession before retirement. That's true nationally. It's true in Texas as well. And so that was a really big insight from the quantitative and the qualitative data. So in the quantitative data, as you can see here, what we looked at is we looked at the 23-24 teacher turnover rates. How many teachers left your district in 23-24? That is strongly associated with your teacher certification rates in 24-25. This makes sense, right? Like this is logical to folks. Some of this is driven by charter school districts. Charter school districts typically have high teacher turnover and low certification rates, but it's also true in the traditional school districts too. And so, there's something happening in those districts that are able to keep their teachers where they don't necessarily need to hire that many new teachers and they can really prioritize certification. They're not necessarily having to go and look for uncertified teachers to fill open positions. This was also really reflected in what we heard from district leaders. One leader from Dallas ISD said, the best recruitment method is retention. That is the number one thing. And so, all those things that we just talked about that they're going to support retention, working conditions, salaries, mentorship, new teacher supports. Those are all really important, and district leaders really emphasize their value.
I know that you came away with kind of 4 policy priorities. Can you mention those?
Yeah, I'd love to talk through and just mention a few practices that kind of undergirded those policy priorities. So the first one was around strengthening certification pathways in partnership with preparation programs. And so for districts to think about how can they do 2 things at once. One, build a pipeline, as we've already heard about, that's going to bring, fully certified, fully prepared new teachers into the district. All the districts that we interviewed had teacher residency programs. They had grow your own programs for paraprofessionals or high school students. They're really thinking creatively and they're investing in those programs. So districts like Cypress Fairbanks investing in their teacher residency program, or Mesquite, which has a paraprofessional program that the district is investing in. That's a long-term strategy. But there's also a short-term need. There are, over 40,000 uncertified teachers in classrooms right now, and they also need support. And so I think the other thing that districts can do is really think about, like, how can we work with preparation providers to serve those uncertified teachers? And that can happen in a lot of different ways, but I think one of the kind of valuable things for districts to think about is how can we steer folks into, programs that are going to support them, that align with our own professional learning goals. And can we do things like create cohorts, within our district? If we have a set of uncertified teachers who are all trying to get certification at the same time, can we bring them together? Can we offer them support? So I think those were two big things that districts can be doing to strengthen those certification pathways in partnership. The second one was on district capacity, thinking about specific district staff. I think often, historically we've thought about teacher preparation as an individual person who is going to go figure this out on their own, right? And I think that times have changed. And in fact, we need to be building systems to say, okay, that is not the way forward. And that actually, if you want people to get through this process, you need to have someone there to help them. And so this looked different in different districts, right? So smaller district, Hutto ISD, they have certification staff in their central office. They're working directly with their uncertified teachers. Figuring out the exams, figuring out all the details of the certification process can be pretty complicated. And a school principal might not be the right person to do that, right? So can we find other district staff who can do that? Another thing that was happening is thinking about certification exams. We often hear this is a barrier for folks. And so, there are districts like Channelview where they're like, okay, we have candidates, we have bilingual teacher candidates that need to make it through these certification exams. So our district staff in the bilingual department, they're going to support that process. And so I think that was another big thing that districts can be thinking about. The third policy priority was around expectations, communicating expectations clearly, and incentivizing certification. And so, every district that we interviewed, they did have specific timelines that people had to get certified under. That's something that's kind of unique about the District of Innovation policy is there's no timeline. You can be uncertified indefinitely under that policy. But these districts were like, no, we're not going to do that. When we hire you, you have to be certified by this time to keep your job. But it's not just an expectation, it's the support that goes with it. So one of the things that a couple of districts that we interviewed were trying, Denton and Channelview, was, we're going to pay, if you're uncertified, you are going to make less money. And it's going to be significantly less money. And that was that was a big incentive, right? People are like, I want to get the full teacher salary. And so, that was a big incentive. And something districts can be thinking about, right, is like, okay, there may be some, savings from that. Can we reinvest that in preparation, in support? And then the final one was just thinking more broadly about your HR policies. Obviously, it's a hard environment, right, to find good teachers. But are there ways that you can think about recruitment and hiring so that you're hiring with the best possible information and you're hiring as early as you can? And so some of the districts were trying different things at the district level. So, for example, in Dallas ISD, they're doing some district level screening and giving their principals priority candidates. You don't have to hire these folks, but you're giving them they need help wading through sometimes a large candidate pool for some of the large districts. And so providing better information earlier so that you can kind of have the best information for principals when they're trying to hire.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really interesting that some of the things that you mentioned about having the districts do, we're also doing some research from the teacher candidates perspective, the uncertified teachers, and things like being called a teacher instead of an associate teacher or some other kind of name. That professionalization has really meant a lot to them. And the same with the salary in the districts where the uncertified teachers are saying, like, I want that extra salary bump. And so I want to finish this certification program as soon as I can.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah.
We had to tweak, as I stated, post-COVID, we hired them as teachers. We associate teachers, but we hired them at the same salary. And one of the things that we tweaked a couple of years ago is we decreased it a little bit. And so there's the additional incentive to become certified. In addition, I love what you said about providing support for the certification because that's made all the difference as well. And so our HR department has designed a program to help our teachers become certified and utilizing the strength of the people who are in our districts and the multilingual department to help with our bilingual certification and then special ed department to help with our special ed certification. So all of those things, they definitely work, and we've seen it move the needle here in Aldine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't help but think, as you were kind of playing it out, how all these different strategies that are trying, it used to be that, hey, hiring the teachers, that's the HR function,
Yes.
right? You go out, recruit them, hire them, bring them in, and then we'll take it from here. But I think the districts who are trying to get ahead of this, and you kind of, are pointing this out, highlighting it, there's other districts who are thinking about, hold on, we need to think about this more comprehensively, as a talent strategy, including not just our finance folks, but if we're going to decrease compensation a little bit. How do we take that money and reinvest it? Provide supports to keep them in the classroom long enough so they can actually get certified, right, and be successful. And so it just kind of speaks to that idea of how is this kind of changing how talent's playing out in a district. And I think there's some districts who already have gotten this and are already, yep, this is going to be the way we do it here. But I think there's still more work to be done and maybe more research to figure out, what about that accelerates, teachers getting certified. So
Yeah.
more to come probably.
Yeah. I know you had interviews with district leaders. Did House Bill 2 come up, or how did that come up in the conversation?
Oh, definitely. Yes. This was last fall. So everything had passed, but the new information was trickling out, right? So everyone was like, I'm on the webinars. I'm looking for all the emails. Yes. So, I would say two things came out of those conversations about House Bill 2. I think one was a lot of excitement about the prep program allotments. These are all districts that had already been investing in pipeline, already been investing in mentorship, but they were really excited. They're like, this is a great new investment. We'll be able to strengthen our programs, in some cases expand our pipeline programs. So a lot of excitement about prep program allotment. I would say a little more caution around the new certification requirements. They were starting to look at all their numbers to think about, okay, what does this mean for us? And I think thinking about a couple things, in some districts, they were reassessing their timelines for certification. So they were thinking about, okay, first we may need to think strategically about we have this population of the K-5, uncertified teachers, and we really need to move them through the certification process quickly. But I think definitely some trepidation of okay, this is a change. Are we going to be able to do this on the timeline? And then I think thinking about the waiver process, that was an option, and I think districts were weighing whether they go forward with a waiver or try to, stick to the original timeline with having the 2 years to phase out the uncertified teachers in foundational subjects.
Yeah. Ryan, we've had those waivers kind of come through now.
Yeah.
You want to talk a litlittle bit about kind of where we are now with that, or?
Yeah, so I think we've seen a lot of districts say we're going to need some more time to make the shift because it really is we're having to build a whole new infrastructure and supply, and it's going to take time for the other sort of incentives and funding structures from House Bill 2 to kick in. So I think we've seen over half of districts ask for more time, ask for the waiver and the flexibility there. But we've also seen about half of districts and charters raise their hand and say, we want to be part of this prep allotment.
Yeah,
we want to be in the first year of something totally new and totally different with a fair number of hoops to jump through, to have about half the school system in the state raise their hand and say, yes, we want to be part of this from the start. And this first year, it will be the mentorship funding will be available, the grow your own funding will be available, and then the funding for residencies will be available. And then several other funding streams will become available in the next school year. But this is an encouraging start for districts saying, we're going to jump in and do this.
Yeah. I know there's some urgency about meeting those mandates, especially for those who haven't asked for that waiver. So I just want to kind of go back to the 4 policy recommendations that Susan highlighted a little bit earlier, which are to strengthen the pathways in collaboration with partners that offer high quality training and meaningful support, to build district capacity and allocate district staff to support certification efforts, to communicate expectations and incentivize certification through the district practices and policies, and to improve hiring district practices and personnel management beyond just House Bill 2. With those kind of 4 recommendations, if you had a magic wand and we could pick one to fully implement with no funding issues, which of those would you start with? This is for everybody.
Yeah, I'll kind of kick us off. I think what I'm really encouraged is this idea of strengthening preparation of our teachers by the partnerships that are formed with UPP partners. And I think, House Bill 2 is a prep allotments call for that, right? If you want the residency dollars, then you have to have a partnership with an approved residency, approved, vendor, right? And so I think we're starting to see lots more conversations happening that bring people to the table around what do we want to be true about our first year teacher, maybe in their first 9 weeks of the classroom. What things will you be doing to support them, once they're doing the student teaching or residency? and here's the things that we could be doing as well. I think at the end, that means good things for teachers because it brings people together, eliminates redundancies, really maximizing the resources that we're providing to support those folks. So for me, I'm excited about all of it. But I will say, I think I'm excited about being able to bring people together and figure out, how do we work together to maximize resources and really make sure that we're providing a great support system for our teacher candidates.
Yeah, I can jump in too. I mean, obviously we wrote the recommendations, so we stand behind all of them. But I think this first one, we've done a lot of research in Texas and other places about teacher residency programs and how that partnership between EPPs and districts really changes the game. It takes it from being, prep programs, they sit over here, they do their own thing, and then the teachers come to the districts and then the district starts from there, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we've just decided that doesn't make sense. We're all in this together. We should have similar goals. We should have the same goals. And I think that partnership really kind of changes not just the individual, new teacher's experience, it changes the whole landscape. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where, this new funding is so exciting because it really creates the opportunity to do that at a state level that I don't think we've ever seen in any other state. So. Mm-hmm.
And I'll just jump in because I totally agree. And it's hard to choose one. I think we have to all of them. So great job on those recommendations. I see them working in tandem, perhaps, but partnerships is the most important because we can't do this alone. We just can't. And without the EPPs and others on board, where we're not just handing off and starting over, where it's a seamless transition, is where we're going to really be able to impact the numbers and have a more prepared teacher job force.
Well, I'm just going to join the chorus here. It's about partnerships and really to do this work differently. And partnership is in the name of the prep. And so it really requires districts and preparation programs to think as partners and to work with the same students toward the same goal in a way that's never been true. Districts have so often been sort of almost the victim of whatever preparation produces, and this is a way for them to sort of be in the driver's seat and saying, this is what we need, and sort of being in that control seat as the consumer of preparation is a true partnership.
Yeah. So House Bill 2 passed, but we know that it's just beginning, right? So I'm wondering, Susan and Ryan especially, what do you guys see in the policy space as House Bill 2 continues to roll out, or other things that may be kind of coming?
I'll start. I think this is so much change and so many new things. Like the mantra I'm trying to adopt is let it cook. I think we've got to let some of these new things marinate. I think school districts have gone through so much change all at once that we really need to sustain this, and we need to make sure we've got the proof points to prove this up. I think we will have them, but we need some time for the system to catch up and to make some demonstrated growth. And I think we'll see that growth in teacher retention. I think we'll see that growth in student outcomes.
That's
and
right.
So I'm excited about seeing that, but we've got to let some of this simmer a little bit to get there. We can't go in expecting big changes every session and expect the system to meet that.
Yeah, and I'll say two things that I think build on earlier points. I think one of them is this idea of a system. The districts need to build a system, and the legislation offers a lot of pieces, right? And so, but it's not just, it's not a simple thing that you're just checking off a box and, okay, we're doing these 4 things and now we're good. This is about how districts are thinking strategically and creatively about how to create these partnerships, to use this investment. And that is hard work. And so I think identifying what districts are doing it well and holding up those models, and especially districts that, don't have all the resources of some of the big, large urban districts do. I think the second thing is thinking about the candidates and thinking about candidate choice. I mean, I think the idea behind the prep allotments is that hopefully it's going to really incentivize people to say, I do want to do, full traditional pre-service preparation. But for a potential teacher, they could walk into a classroom and make a full teacher salary right away and do online training. And that does sound appealing. And I understand the appeal. And so can these incentives kind of change people's thinking about, what type of preparation they might be interested in? I think that's a really important point and something that will be really good to watch.
Well, we only have about 10 minutes left, and we have gotten a couple of audience questions, both previously and we're getting some live. And one is for you, Ryan. And the question is really, as House Bill 2 continues to roll out and have implementation, what are some of the data that people are going to be looking at to really evaluate the implementation of that?
I think there are a lot of pieces. I think the teacher attrition data, the teacher turnover data, I think that's something that's sort of an overall indicator of the health of the profession. I think there's a lot of things that go into that, but I think that's a big one. Another, I think, is the percentage of traditionally prepared candidates. We're at a very low number of teachers coming through our traditional preparation programs, whether that's student teacher or residency. That number needs to start climbing by a lot. We need to double or triple that number, and that number needs to start trending positively pretty soon. This should support this. This is aligned, but that's a very low number. And to me, that's an indicator that the incentive is working. And then I think things like the overall percentage of uncertified teachers, these kind of things are things we'll watch. But to me, at the end of the day, it's about student growth and student impact. And so we will know if this is working when our student achievement results and our student growth results start trending in a positive direction.
Any other thoughts on possible implementation and how we might think about its impacts?
You know, when I think about my childhood experience, growing up in poverty, and when I went to school, I can still remember Miss Freeman, my kindergarten teacher, Miss Lepley, my second grade teacher, Miss Bradford, my fourth grade teacher. And I share that because I looked up to my teachers, and I remember having my first African-American teacher, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to be just like her. I want to wear my hair like her. I want to, and so, and the idea of being a teacher was highly regarded. So when I told my grandmother or I told anyone that I wanted to be a teacher, they were proud. And so I think in addition to some of the policy and some of the resources that are building this ecosystem or providing this whole approach to supporting the new teachers, we've also got to somehow work to elevate the profession. I believe that our teachers are doing great work, and I believe that 80-90% of our teachers are incredible. And the remaining ones, we've got to get them to support. But in order to continue to attract teachers who want to go through that traditional pathway, or attract teachers who want to be teachers and aren't, I think I'll do a teacher if this doesn't work out. We've got to continue to elevate the profession.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just something that kind of, I keep thinking about is going back to what we said earlier. There's a lot of folks who raise their hand, say, I want to become a teacher, and how do I figure out a pathway to get there? And I think we're still early on. Some of the models that we're going to be using in the future are just now being built. They're just now being put together. And so think about, some of the high school students that you all have, the partnerships that you have with your community colleges to offer no-cost pathways to get an associate's degree. Now we need to figure out, how do we take other resources from the state, House Bill 8 with community college funding, to help, augment and help provide us an opportunity for a no-cost or low-cost pathway to becoming a teacher. And so all that to say, I think we will also want to pay attention to what's the overall health of these new pathways, apprenticeship programs, that sort of thing. So I think a lot to keep an eye on.
Susan, before we wrap up, we learned a lot about your research. Can you tell us where to find that research?
Yeah. So learningpolicyinstitute.org. Come on over. We have a lot of great stuff. But this, is newly released, and we're going to have more coming soon. With the brief is up, 8 pages. It's pretty short, easy read. And then the full report, if you love digging into the details, will be up soon.
Excellent. Thanks. We will also have the report when we put Upstream out. It will be linked there at houstonendowment.org/resources. Ryan, Dr. Goffney, Susan, Carlos, I'm just so glad that you guys were here to have this conversation with us today. I just thank you so much for sharing your work and your insights with this audience. It has been just a great conversation. I also want to thank our comms team who has put all this together, and our newly minted Dr. Helen Clancy, who didn't know I was going to do that. Join us next time on Upstream, where my colleague Robel will talk about building capacity in nonprofits. Until next time, I'm Sarah Jones, and this is Upstream. Upstream is a production of Houston Endowment. We're a private foundation established in 1937 by Jesse H. Jones and his wife, Mary Gibbs Jones, to improve the quality of life for everyone in Greater Houston.